What's up, everyone? I'm Dr. Jacob Wilson. Today we're going to be talking about the ramifications of all the fallen warriors who have died in bodybuilding recently. Very sad. Before we get into that, though, listen, if you love this content, the best way you can really support this channel is by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. So, guys, it really hit me back in 2004. One of my favorite bodybuilders as a kid was Mike Maserata. And Mike, this guy, he had the biggest arms and diamond massive calves. I remember reading him in Flex magazine and seeing his routines. I remember he used to talk about, one time he said that he was bulking and he couldn't finish his food. He was just too full. So he ended up just taking a steak and the rest of his food because he couldn't eat it any longer. He blended it up in the blender with some milk and just shoved it down his throat. He said he threw up many times, force feeding himself. And what goes to show you, but his theory was that there's no overtraining, there's only undereating. And while we can talk about that, I think one of the things that I've learned about bodybuilding and through decades of studying it is it's an extreme sport. And in fact, today at the professional level, it's become more extreme than ever, okay? And obviously bodybuilders are taking more pharmaceuticals than they've ever taken, ever. You see they're bigger and bigger and bigger. They're getting on stage 300 pounds, right? And it's a level we've never seen it. And so I remember Mike, I got hit this. I was in school and I read in a magazine that Mike was in a hospital having open heart surgery in 2004. Now he was in his 30s. One of my heroes, open heart surgery. From then on, it was downhill for Mike. I mean, he had heart attacks, multiple problems. In 2014, he had to stop his job. He was I think a bondsman. So he had a normal job. This guy was a professional IFBB pro, one of my heroes, many heroes, people's heroes. And he was just working an average job. He gave it all up, right? He'd given everything, his whole life to the sport. And here he was, only could use 20% of his heart's capacity. Guys, imagine what that is. Just standing up and walking, you've doubled your metabolic rate. So standing up and walking would have been a high-intensity interval training session to Mike. It was heartbreaking. Heartbreaking. It breaks my heart to this day. And in 2014, Mike died in the hospital. Today we see guys like the great Flex Wheeler, the Sultan of Symmetry, one of the greatest bodybuilders of all time. And with complications, he's had to have amputations and he's lost muscle and he's still fighting, right? And I remember there was a bodybuilding video that came out and it was titled 35 Bodybuilders Who Have Died in 2021. I was rooting Flexitron Shawn Rhoden on for years. I knew he'd be Mr. Olympia. And he's the first guy who came out to defeat the defending Mr. Olympia champion, Phil Heath. And this guy, he defeated him at 43 years of age. And humble beginnings. He came from, if you've ever watched this guy, he came from Jamaica. Him and his family, beautiful mom and dad, beautiful brothers. And they worked their way out. His dad wanted him to have a better life. And they worked their way out to the United States. And Shawn Rhoden trained and conquered the mountain, conquered Mount Olympus at 43. And then he had a lot of hard times from then on out. A lot of sad things happened in his life. And at 46, the news that broke the hearts of so many people, Shawn Rhoden died at 46 years of age of heart failure. Good friend of mine, John Meadows. I remember in the 90s, guys, in the 90s, early 2000s, reading this guy named the Mountain Dog. I remember I did a podcast with John Meadows, and we talked about intraset stretching. This was one of the smartest individuals I've ever met in my life. And he's also an IFBB pro. People loved him from around the world. He had educational content. Look up John Meadows. He has so much educational content that taught so many people how to train. He was a family man. He had beautiful children, a beautiful wife. And John died in his 50s recently. Unbelievable, right? You guys remember in 2018, Dallas McCarver, right? This guy was a star. He was vying to win the Arnold Classic, maybe eventually the Mr. Olympia contest. And he was in top 6. They were doing a pose down. I remember I was backstage at this event. And I remember he didn't look good in backstage. And he was just out of it. And then he was on stage, and you see this massive mammoth of a man start to waver back and forth until all the bodybuilders had to catch him before he collapsed. Dallas died that year. More recently, Cedric McMillan, another great bodybuilder, up-and-coming guy, a contender for the Olympia title. I remember seeing him, you saw him in the hospital wanting to fight and get back. Everyone died of heart failure, embolisms, where a clot breaks off and blocks flow. A young kid, Boston Lloyd, this guy was not really famous for being the greatest bodybuilder. He was famous because he made this huge transformation in a year. He went from a pudgy kid to making a Captain America transformation in 1 year's time. He was very famous for the stack that he was on of anabolics. And all these people have in common is kidney failure, liver problems, heart disease. Guys, what's the point of this? We got to focus on health, right? It's not just about gaining as much size as possible. You got to focus on health as well. And so what I'm going to be doing is a series on longevity and health. I'm going to start off by talking about cardiovascular longevity, since so many people are dying from heart failure. I'm going to talk about aerobic fitness, how to improve it, how to calculate it, how to measure it, how to get better at it. And I'll bring in some studies about how it improves longevity. But you need to understand, guys, that this is a brutal sport. You need to look at the evolution of the sport across time. You look early on in the 50s and the 60s, you had people like Steve Reeves, great physiques. You had in the 70s, they got a little bit bigger. Yeah, people started to take some anabolics, but compared to today's standards, they were a lot lighter. And they had really high training volumes all the way till today, where they're very high. We have to focus on longevity, guys, as much as we focus on muscle building. And again, that's what you're going to hear the Muscle PhD talk about longevity more than ever. So this channel is not going to just talk about gaining muscle. It's talking about longevity, living longer, becoming younger. Because I care about your health and I care about your performance across your lifespan. Thank you so much, guys. I'll see you next time.